Be seated. Here's some more little Santa things. Did you know that Santa knows karate? He has a black belt. Did you know that? Did you know how much Santa paid for his sleigh? Nothing. It was on the house. Did it? It was on the house.
Bad when he's got it.
And what do you call a bankrupt Santa? Santa Nicholas. Get it? Santa Nicholas.
You didn't tell any of those yesterday, I hope.
Santa Nicholas.
Yeah, the Starbucks was good,
Yeah, the Starbucks was good. All right, Acts 16. Thank you for amusing me with my jokes, for tolerating me.
I saw one today, I'm sorry, it was a little gingerbread man cookies at the doctor, and he said, you know, the doctor that his knee hurt, and he said, did you try any icing? Try to put ice on it. Try
icing, yeah, icing it.
Come on, come on. Okay.
That was just as good, Anita, thank you.
It was just as bad.
I wasn't going to say that.
Acts 16. We're going to begin looking at two women, one liberated, one enslaved. We left the book of Acts in September. This is the 141st lesson in the book of Acts. I think MacArthur calls this a portrait of two women. I like the idea of using those words. I wanted to use that word, especially one liberated. That's always a buzzword for me. And one enslaved. Kind of a long title, but still, we're going to talk about two women. One who is transfigured, if you will, and one who is disfigured. A liberated woman and a one woman who is enslaved. And tonight we'll begin to talk about a lady named Lydia. A lady named Lydia. So, two women, opposites in many ways. One of them is godly. One of them is satanic. One is liberated. One is enslaved. One belongs to Jesus. One of them does not belong to Jesus. And if you think about it, those two women are mirrors of every woman. Every woman everywhere. For to one degree or another, every woman fits into the category of Lydia or the category of the maid who had the spirit of divination. Only two kinds of women in the world. Liberated ones, enslaved ones, and for that matter, there are only two kinds of men in the world. Liberated men and enslaved men. So since we've been gone for a little while, let's just back up a little bit so we can get a feeling for what's happening in the text since we've been gone a while. So Paul and Silas are on their second missionary trip, and the Lord is giving them a lesson in regards to the use of the word no. In your outline, the word is no. Because it seems no matter what direction they want to go, they're stopped by the Holy Spirit. And remember last time we looked at a map, and remember they had left Jerusalem after the council, and they had gone north. They'd come to Antioch, and then they progressed on their second missionary tour, if you will. Paul and Silas had come to had taken off and gone into Galatia, where Paul and Barnabas had come on the first tour. And remember, the first time around, they had gone through the Mediterranean Sea. They'd come up through Paphos on the Isle of Cyprus, and they came up and they entered Galatia from the west. But on this journey, They come from the east, and they come to the churches that they had already founded in Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, Antioch, in the area known as Pisidia. And they went there to do one thing. They went to strengthen the believers that were there. Remember, the Judaizers had come after them. So they go back through to strengthen the churches, believing that a priority in evangelism should always be develop strong Christians who are able to reproduce themselves. You need to develop strong Christians who are able to reproduce themselves. We looked at that last time, and while accomplishing the strengthening of the Galatian Christians, they then desired to go to the west and conquer new territory for the cause of Christ. Now, it seemed very natural for them to go immediately to the west into what we call Asia Minor, divided into several sections. Mysia is one of those sections, but the whole area is called Asia Minor. And Paul's concerned, he wanted to go into Asia Minor. Lots of great cities there. Philadelphia, Sardis, Thyatira, Pergamum, Smyrna, Ephesus, great cities. Cities which would later become strongholds for the gospel. They're known in the book of Revelation as the churches of the Revelation. So Paul wants to go west. Couldn't really go south. Water's there. He figured west and the greatest and the finest provinces of Asia. And so he thought, we'll go there and work the gospel into Asia. But it says in verse 6, in our source chapter 16, they were forbidden by the Holy Spirit to preach the word in Asia. So the Spirit shuts the door. We don't know how many, we don't really have any specifics on how that happened, but we do know that it did happen. So that only leaves one way to go. You can't go south. You've been to the east. You can't go west. So they begin to go to the north, and they said, God must be leading us to Bithynia, another area to the north, and so they figure we'll press on into Bithynia. But what does verse 7 say? The Holy Spirit did not permit them. So far, they are being maneuvered by the slamming of every door as they attempt to progress. And if they were an average Christian of today, after those two stoppings, they would have crumpled, gone to a local Christian bookstore, bought a book on suffering, and consoled themselves. They would have no idea what to do next. But if we understand something of the persistence of Paul, that you would imagine, you can see that he kind of wiggled, squiggled. You got that map up, John? A fine line between Bithynia up in here. Can you give me more on the right side? So he's up in here. He's wanted to go into here. The Lord has pushed him to the north, and he kind of keeps going now, heading to the west, okay? Paul was a persistent man. That was part of made him who he was. And it was looking as God was closing these doors. Maybe he was proofing Paul, testing his faithfulness, making sure he was determined, the kind of man that God could really use. And I think that's a very important thing for us to understand. When you try to function for the Lord and you see doors close, keep on moving. Outline, the word is moving. Keep on moving. Because that may be the Lord's test of your faithfulness. And out of that test, you may be able to grow your capacity to do the job that he wants and needs you to do. If you find yourself balking at continuing, folding up the first time the door closes, it may be that you may not see much of a door after that. But if you're persistent, as Paul shows us, God will open some marvelous things to you. So they went along the north there of Asia, kind of went through the northern part, that would be Mysia, It indicates in verse 8 that they came through Mysia to a place called Troas. It was named for Alexander Troas. Alexander the Great's located on the very eastern edge of the Aegean Sea. It's a town that became somewhat 10 miles away from it. You would know the city. Most of you have heard of the city of Troy. Most of you are familiar with that story. And the whole area there, if you, at this time in history, that whole area along that seaboard of Asia Minor on the Aegean Sea had a group of many famous people, Helen of Troy, Homer, Hippocrates, several other famous Greek names were from that area, and it really was a place that was as Greek as Athens was Greek. And Greek territory at this time, and in the way that it is still a territory, although the Romans run everything now. But it's part of the reason why today there's such great animosity between the Greeks and the Turks, because all of these places now, all those islands, are under the jurisdiction of Turkey. And there was one thing you didn't want to do when you were in Greece was say anything pleasing about any Turk, because they hated the Turks with abandon. So, but at this time in history, the area is saturated, infiltrated, if you will, by Greek people. And this particular place was a Greek city, a free city under Caesar Augustus. So Troas became eventually a Roman colony. So they arrived in this city, and they're going to go. They want to keep going somewhere, but there's nowhere to go except for the water. So, having proven their faithfulness, having shown God their persistence, God immediately, upon their arrival there, gives them a new direction, and that's in verse 9. A vision appeared to Paul in the night, a man of Macedonia. And perhaps he recognized him because he looked like a Macedonian. I don't know what he was wearing, but he did say, the man says, what does the man want Paul to do? Come on over here to Macedonia and help us. That was the call of God in a dream and a vision at night. So here they're at Troas, and Paul was there, Silas was there. Who else was with Paul and Silas? Timothy is there with them. And now they pick up a new team member. Who's the new team member? He writes, does he use the word we? Does he use the word we in verse 10? Now after he had seen, what's the next one? After he had seen the vision immediately, who? We. So who's we? Who's the we? Who's the writer? Luke. Okay, so now you have a 4-man missionary team. You have Paul, Silas. They picked up Timothy on the way over in Galatia, and now they've added Luke to their team. That's the first of the we's in the book of Acts. There's others, but that's the first time Luke uses that word, and somehow he joins up. We don't know. Maybe Paul needed to see a doctor. Paul had a certain he had a lot of physical problems, mainly because he was always getting beat up so bad. You know, he was always getting beat up. So he ends up, now they've added a physician to the team, which is a good one, and maybe Luke was a local doctor there, and they plugged him into their team, but he joins now, and so we begin to encounter this word we, as the author indicates himself. Well, from Troas, they're supposed to go to Macedonia. Give me that map again, Mr. John. And they're supposed to go, oh, that was quick. Oh, wow. Am I doing that? I'm not doing that, am I? All right. See, there you go. Give me that. They're going to go to, this is where they're going, Neapolis, which is the seaport of Philippi, okay? But on the way, they're going to stop over here, Samothrace. Nikki and I went up into part of this area, into some of the islands up in here. And you can see Samothrace from quite a ways away. It sticks up. It's kind of like a mountain that just sticks up straight up out of the sea. And so what's happening here is that the Lord has not allowed them to continue on in their ministry in Asia, but now they're going to take their first step into where? Into Europe. Okay? So this is, and maybe prior to this, some of the gospel had trickled into Rome. I don't know for sure. It's possible. But this is where we see a beginning of the ministry of Jesus Christ, the gospel going in to the continent of Europe. Paul being the apostle to the Gentiles. So Christianity is expanding its borders beyond Asia. It's going to extend into Macedonia, and Macedonia is what we would call today present-day Greece. Macedonia, there's actually a nation of Macedonia up above Greece, and the Greeks have fought with the Macedonians for years about their name, and I think they made them stop or change their name. They finally ironed that out. But Macedonia came under the power of Philip of Macedon. That's Peck's last name, Macedon, a friend of mine. And Philip of Macedon was the father of Alexander the Great, okay? Who really was one of the great world powers, who Hellenicized, which Hellenica is Greece. He Hellenicized the world, and the world adopted the language of Greek, and it's one of the things that made the spreading of the gospel of Jesus Christ easy. All right? Important people who would have never known that they were used that way, but that's how they were used. And so from Macedonia, at one time the rule of the world took place under Philip and Alexander the Great, but now it is simply a Roman providence at this time in history with some great cities such as Philippi, Thessaloniki, and then further to the south you would have Athens, and then further to the south you would have the city of Corinth. A formidable area. And in verse 10, notice, it says immediately. They have the vision, and then immediately they're ready to go. I love that part. It's an important part. When God calls you to do something, He's going to provide for you the way to do what He wants you to do. So it says, therefore, they sailed from Troas. Okay? God gave them a boat. Doesn't say how, but they had a boat. God never asked you to do something. Listen, God will never ask you to do something without providing the means to do it. And when the door opens, you'll find the way right there that's already ready for you to go. And notice something further. It says, sailing from Troas, they ran a straight course, which is pretty unusual in that part of the Aegean Sea. They sailed in a straight course. They had this middle stop in Samothrace, and that's very kind of halfway between Troas and Neapolis, the port city of Philippi, about 10 miles from Philippi. But they're going there, and they stop at this mountain island, 5,000 feet, sticks up out of the sea, and they're able to go straight there. They stop there for the next day, for the night, and then the next day they're in Neapolis. 2 days, okay? And that's a quick trip, because when they make this trip next time going back the other direction, it takes them 5 days. But in the end of verse 11, it says that they went on a straight course to Samothrace, and the next day to Neapolis. The return, like I said, the return will take 5 days, and so we conclude that the sea was favorable, the winds were favorable. And I don't want to spiritualize things too much, but I'll remind you, when God opens the door, the boat is ready and the winds are favorable and the way will be straight. When it's time to move, God will move you. So now they arrive on European soil. They are now in areas that are more firmly under Roman control. And immediately upon hitting Philippi, they meet two women. These are the first two individuals that are pointed out in the ministry of Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke in Macedonia. And these two women are particular in their natures. Let me say that these two women, as I've said, mirror for us, in one sense, everybody, because everybody fits into these two categories. Of course, knowing me, you know I couldn't help but think in reference in regards to this message on the subject of being liberated about women's liberation, which in our recent past has so dominated our society. I won't bore you with a lot of thoughts in regards to women's liberation, but I will bore you with a few thoughts about women's liberation. The first thing is that it amazes me that the world and all the people who are talking about liberation haven't got the faintest idea of what true liberation is. The idea that liberation is such a good thing, and just running around having abortions whenever you want, and that is one of the results of women's liberation. Liberation means being free to fool around with whoever you want to fool around with. It means being a blatant lesbian who joins a group and marches in a parade and wears ridiculous outfits. That kind of liberation does nothing but shirk the responsibilities of the home. That liberation is a violation of God's given patterns for love, submission, and to me it's just ridiculous. It's not in any way, shape, or form liberation. What these people are really doing is exchanging one kind of human, and your outline the word is bondage, for a worse kind of human bondage. These women who always want everything that men have no idea what they've been asking for. And they have been getting what they've been asking for. Their death rates are increasing due to the same things that beleaguer men. You know, I don't know about you guys. I have never felt truly liberated. I really haven't. I've always felt responsible. And women want to be like men, and to me, in that in no way, shape, or form liberates them. You know what they're really doing is like they're like the prisoner he's in the jail, and he's in one cell, and he exchanges that cell for another cell, and he thinks he's liberated. That is not liberation. That's exchanging one kind of slavery for another kind of slavery. And deep down, I think what they soon discover is that what they really want is they just want to they want to have a free soul in some way, shape, or form. They want their soul to transcend the bondage that they'll never transcend. One of the most popular books in recent years has been Jonathan Living Seagull. Have any of you ever read Jonathan Living Seagull? Jonathan Livingston Seagull? It's an interesting book. It's about a seagull who maximizes his effort and is able to fly 240 miles per hour. The book is about his seeking after self-perfection. And the book has sold well, and it enthralls many people because it's a seagull who goes beyond the capacities of normal seagulls and flies 240 miles per hour. And that's what people want to do. People want to fly beyond their present situation that they are caught in. And all of this talk about liberation is a terrible mirror to the fact that people are prisoners. Without Jesus, people are prisoners. They may be in a different cell, but they're all prisoners. There's no way out. I'll tell you something. We're going to meet a liberated lady here named Lydia. And we're going to see how her life reflects her liberation. And when she got liberated, her liberation was content. She was content to be who God designed for her to be, okay? Being liberated, truly liberated. When you're truly liberated, you're free to accept yourself with the full acceptance as God designed you to be. That's being free. And Lydia was free. There's only one kind of true liberation, and Jesus put it this way. He said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you." That's liberation. Paul said, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free," he says. Stand fast in the liberty by which Christ has made us. So if a person really wants to be liberated, then they need to come to Jesus Christ. Because in Jesus Christ, you're liberated from the power of sin. You're liberated from death. You're liberated from Satan. You're liberated from hell. And you're free to accept the eternal blessings of God and to accept yourself as God made you and to be content with what God has designed you to be. That, ladies and gentlemen, that, beloved, is true liberation. Okay? Two ladies, one transformed, one disfigured. Verse 12. Look at the dear lady at the end of verse 12. It's what it says. At the end of verse 12, "And we were staying in the city for some days." Again, Luke using the word "we." They're in the city of Philippi, a chief city in that part of Macedonia. It's described as a foremost city, a protos, a leading, a chief city, important city. Not sure in what regards, but it had great importance in that area. It's located along a highway, the Egnatian Highway, a long highway, 490-mile highway, like from between here and from Benson to Clovis, New Mexico, 490 miles, all built by hand. And the Romans built all these roadways to military power. If you got on this highway and went to the west, and you got in a boat and went across that sea and went to Rome, you would run into the Appian Way, which is most famous for the great pizzas they make, the Appian Way. Did you know that? The Appian Way. So, if you went across the Adriatic Sea. So in verse 12, it says it's a colony. It's the only city in the book of Acts which is called a colony. There are 6 colonies mentioned. This is the only one that's called a colony. It's under Roman rule in a loose way. One of the reasons the Roman Empire fell is because it loosened its hold on its outlying territories. Nebuchadnezzar was such a great king, had such a great empire because he was so strong. That's why when Jesus comes, he'll rule with an iron rod. There'll be a strong kingdom. But these colonies had 3 things. First thing they had was liberatus, which meant they could self-govern. They had self-government in your outline. Secondly, they had immunitas. They didn't have to pay tribute. In the word in your outline is to pay tribute. And then they had eostaticalium, which meant they actually had the rights of Roman citizens. So, with all those rights, the government had, the Roman Empire had given them. You had praetors who were the rulers of these colonies, and then they had working underneath them the lectors. The lectors were the guys that ran around with the clubs. If the praetors told them to beat somebody, they went and beat them. If you look at verse 22 later on, that's what they do to Paul and Silas. They tell them, go beat those guys, and they go beat those guys with their little rods. And Philippi, Ephesus, Roman colonies. So you have a gospel landing at this place, this Roman colony, and you'll say, man, they probably went to town and had a revival that day. It says, but that's not what it says. What it says is that They hung around for a few days. So what do you think they're waiting for? Saturday. They're waiting for Saturday. Okay, that's what I think. Saturday was the Sabbath, and what Paul went into a town, what did he do? He always went to the synagogues. Lots of reasons, but he always went to the synagogues because I think one of the reasons, if he went to the Gentiles first, the Jews wouldn't talk to him second. Number two, if he went to the Jews, he knew they would hear him. He would have a place to speak at the synagogue. He was a Jew and a past Pharisee. And third, if he could win a couple of Jews to the Lord, he would have a bigger evangelism team to go chase around the Gentiles. So he would usually go to the synagogue, but he has a problem in Philippi. What's the problem? There ain't no synagogue. How many men do you have to have how many faithful men do you have to have a minyan? M-I-N-Y-A-N is the name for the group that's required to have a synagogue. How many? 10. That would reflect a lack of 10 faithful Jewish men in the city of Philippi. So who's going to begin the spread of the gospel in Europe? Liberated women. Really liberated women. The gospel will begin here in Europe, and there's a lot of stories about missionary women that God has used to spread his gospel. So there's no reason to worry about women's liberation. Just work for the Lord. So look what it says on the Sabbath day. What did they do? They went to the river. Why did they go to the river? Well, they waited to the Sabbath, found out there wasn't a synagogue, and then they went to the river, and it says where prayer was customarily made, and they sat down and they spoke to the women who were there. So there was a prayer meeting down at the river, and how many men does there appear to be? None. It appears that the only ones at the prayer meeting are the women. I won't make any political comments about that, all right? They didn't have enough Jewish men to start a synagogue, but the women were still being faithful. You know, when they went to Babylon, if you look at Psalm 137, it says they sat by the rivers and they wept over their exile. But you just have a group of Jewish women who are willing to go down to the river and pray. So they go to the river, and they had a place of prayer. In the Greek, it's the word proseuche, P-R-O-S-U-K-E-E, proseuche. It means a place of prayer. And they go to a place of prayer, probably have a overhanging tree. Maybe they've built some kind of gazebo, a grove of trees, a place that's a little secluded, and they go down to the same place every Saturday. And Paul has found out where they meet, so he goes down there by the river. They always go to the river. Why do they go to the river? Yeah, they got to get clean. A good Jew is going to get clean. If you went to the temple, what would you see around the temple? Pools. Walk in, walk out, walk in, walk out. Got to get clean. So they have access to water at the river so they can get purified. And even in Babylon, they had gone to the river. And it says they hung their harps and wept. A really sad picture. But here we are introduced to a very excited, liberated woman, and her name is Lydia. And next week we will look at her specifics, okay? Amen?